Howdy folks, and welcome back to World of Warships with your host, Rear Admiral Jingles. I've actually been spreading myself kind of thin over the various different tech trees in World of Warships. I'm basically going up the American and Japanese destroyer and cruiser lines at the same time. I'm not touching the carriers because carrier gameplay bores me. And I've been staying clear of the battleships because, well, I have problems with battleships in World of Warships at the moment, but more on that in a future video. For the moment, however, well, I kind of had a hankering for the old Isokaze, the Japanese Tier 4. I had some fantastic games with it in the closed beta. And I've been watching some of your replays, and you've been having some fantastic games with it in the open beta. But I didn't quite have enough experience on the Japanese Tier 3 to unlock it, so I jumped into the Gremyashki, the Russian Tier 5 Premium, played one game, earned 5,300 experience. Converted that to free XP, and Bob's your mother's brother. One Isokaze-class Tier 4 Japanese destroyer. Easy when you know how. It's usual at this point in the review that I embark on a long and detailed discussion of the history of the ships involved, but there isn't really that much to say about the Isokazes. They were built in 1915 and commissioned in 1916, and they were designed as escorts for Japan's new classes of fast battleships, such as the Issei and the Yamashiro. Yamashiro seen here in the foreground with the Fuso and the Haruna Congo-class battlecruiser in the background. With the speed of these new battleships, Japan needed escorts that were capable of keeping up with them, and so 4 of these Isokaze-class destroyers were built. The 4 ships of the class were the Isokaze, which was obviously the lead ship of the class, the Amatsukaze, seen here on patrol in the Yangtze River in China, the Hamakaze, and the Tokitsukaze, which you can see here on sea trials. The Tokitsukaze was the only ship that really had anything notable happen to it. It was wrecked off the Miyazaki coast in 1918, but was raised and recommissioned. All 4 of the ships saw service in the closing stages of the First World War, and then that's pretty much it. They were all retired in 1936. None of them saw service in the Second World War. They were bigger, faster, more reliable, and better armed than previous destroyers, such as the Minekaze class. The engines had a rated shaft horsepower of 27,000, which gave them a top speed of 34 knots, but the engines couldn't be run continuously at more than 7,000 shaft horsepower, otherwise the engines would blow up, and that did kind of limit their performance. Nevertheless, they were pretty good for the time, and that's pretty much it as far as the Isokaze class destroyers are concerned. So, what's this thing like in World of Warships? Well, obviously, in World of Warships you don't have any problems with running the engine continuously at top speed. In World of Warships, these things are very, very good. I have had some absolutely killer games in this ship. And there are a couple of surprises with this ship that you wouldn't expect, given that it's a Japanese destroyer, and Japanese destroyers have notoriously bad guns. The Isokaze's guns, well, it's still probably going to lose if it gets into a shooting match with an American destroyer of an equivalent or possibly even a lower tier, but they're not that bad. With the upgraded fire control system on the Isokaze, you can fire these 120mm guns out to a range of 9.1 kilometers, and what came as a big surprise to me was that's actually 500 meters further than the 102mm guns on the American Tier 4 destroyer, the Clemson. Okay, Jingles, but the Japanese destroyers have always had bigger guns than the American counterparts. The big Achilles heel for the Japanese destroyers is the rate at which those turrets rotate, and yes, it is true that the Isokaze does turn its guns slower than the Clemson, but not by much. Now, bear in mind we are down here at Tier 4, so you're not going to get that blisteringly fast 5 to 7 second 180 degree turret rotation time that you get on high tier American destroyers like the Fletcher and the Gearing. At Tier 4 it takes the USS Clemson 18 seconds to rotate its turrets 180 degrees, and while the Isokaze is slower, it's not that much slower, 22.5 seconds. There are of course other differences. The Isokaze has 120mm guns, the Clemson has 102mm guns, so the Clemson can fire faster but the shells don't do as much damage. Interestingly, the Isokaze does more damage with its high explosive shells than it does with its armor piercing, 2,000 maximum high explosive damage, which is 25% more than the Clemson with its own high explosive ammunition. The Clemson obviously wins as far as rate of fire is concerned with 8.6 rounds per minute. But again, it's not that much faster. The Isokaze still manages a very respectable 6 rounds per minute. So the Isokaze has shells that do more damage, that fire almost as quickly, in turrets that rotate almost as quickly, and fire further than the Clemson. The Clemson does beat the Isokaze where raw speed is concerned, but again, not by much. It's 1 knot faster. And the Isokaze is a lot more stealthy than the Clemson. The Isokaze will only be detected on the surface, providing it's not firing its guns, from a range of 6.1 kilometers, whereas you can spot the Clemson from 7 kilometers away. Well, surely the Clemson has better torpedoes. No. No, the Clemson's torpedoes suck. The upgraded torpedoes on the Isokaze, the Type 92s, will do 14,400 damage at a range of 7 kilometers and travel through the water at a speed of 68 knots and fire at a rate of 1.3 rounds per minute. They're housed in 3 torpedo launchers of 2 tubes each for 6 torpedoes that can be fired over the port or starboard side of the ship because they're in centerline housings. The Clemson does have more torpedoes. It can fire 12 of them, but it can't fire them all at the same target at the same time. It has 4 torpedo launchers of 3 tubes each, but unlike the Isokaze, they're mounted in the sides of the ship. So it can fire 6 torpedoes at the same time at one target, but then it has to turn the ship around if it wants to launch more torpedoes from the other side. And the torpedoes aren't that good. They only do 11,700 damage, they only have a range of 5.5 kilometers, which is 1.5 kilometers under the detection range of the Clemson, and they only travel through the water at a speed of 56 knots. That does mean that the Clemson can be absolutely devastating if it catches you at short range with a broadside of 6 torpedoes, but, well, the Isokaze can do that as well, and it can do it at long range. None of this, of course, means that the Clemson is a bad ship. It's not. It's a very, very good little Tier 4 destroyer. I've had some amazing games in the Clemson. But the Isokaze is just better. There is no question about it. This is one of the best kept secrets in the Japanese destroyer line. Everybody goes on about the Minekaze at Tier 5, and the Minekaze is spectacularly good. Its guns are absolutely terrible, but its torpedoes are fantastic, and the Minekaze is the most played destroyer in World of Warships. And yet, hardly anybody knows about the Isokaze down here at Tier 4, which in its own way is just as good. And if you're not sold on the Isokaze by now, well, wait until you've seen these replays. This game was quite late on in the closed beta. Obvious differences: I don't have the speed boost consumable, but I do have 1 more charge for my smokescreen, 3 rather than 2. The enemy team have a New York-class battleship, they have a Furutaka-class cruiser, and a Nicholas-class destroyer. I like the Nicholas. Nicholas is another good little American ship. I don't really have a problem with the American destroyers with their crappy torpedo range. At least they explode on impact, which is more than could be said for the torpedoes that American destroyer and submarine captains were saddled with during World War II itself. That's one way in which we can be very, very glad that World of Warships isn't 100% historically accurate. Perhaps the best example of just how disastrously bad American torpedoes were is illustrated by the story of the USS Tenosa, an American submarine commanded by Lieutenant Commander Daspit, and early on in the opening stages of the Pacific War, the USS Tenosa came across a unescorted, fully loaded Japanese oil tanker that was not zigzagging en route from Palau to Truk. Taking up an almost perfect firing position, the USS Tenosa launched 4 torpedoes from his bow torpedo tubes. 2 of them hit and did absolutely nothing, other than alert the Japanese oil tanker that they were under attack, at which point the tanker turned and began putting on speed. Out of sheer desperation, Lieutenant Commander Daspit quickly fired off the remaining 2 forward torpedo tubes and was rewarded with 2 hits and 2 explosions, which rendered the tanker unable to manoeuvre, and it sat there dead in the water. While still submerged, the USS Tenosa, with his target unable to manoeuvre, unlike me, as I frantically try to avoid these 2 destroyers and 2 cruisers that are shooting at me, Lieutenant Commander Daspit then set up in a textbook beam-on attack position and fired 1 more torpedo straight at the middle of this tanker, and it did nothing. He then ordered every single remaining torpedo to be inspected. Every single torpedo was found to be in perfect working order, so he fired 1 more, and that also failed to explode. So then he fired another 7, and they all hit, and they all failed to explode. He took his single remaining torpedo back to Pearl Harbor with him, presumably so he could beat the Chief of the Bureau of Ordnance around the head and shoulders with it until he admitted that there was something actually wrong with the torpedoes, and not a problem with the crews firing them, as the Bureau of Ordnance had insisted up to this point. And there's my first kill, which is nice. Still another destroyer out there though. And what's about to happen is 100% my fault. This guy's about to run aground. He's going to make himself a sitting duck. I light him up with the guns and bang, he runs aground. I fire off the torpedoes slightly astern at him because I know he's going to be reversing off the rocks. Did you see the friendly destroyer off to the left? Because I didn't. That's no excuse, of course. I mean, this is 100% my fault, as that friendly destroyer, who closes to within about a kilometre of that enemy destroyer, and rides slap bang right into my torpedoes. Nothing I can do about it at this stage. I mean, it took him long enough to drive into them, but there you go, I've just team killed him. And it wasn't his fault. You may be sitting there thinking to yourself, well, it wasn't really your fault either. And I'm there in chat going, oh, for fuck's sakes. Well, he's the one who should be going, oh, for fuck's sakes. You know, he's the one who got team killed. And you may be sitting there thinking, well, you didn't have much of a warning that he was there, Jingles. I mean, he was miles away when you launched those torpedoes. It's still my fault. I'm the one who should be checking my firing arcs for any friendly ships anywhere near my intended angle of attack before I put those torpedoes in the water, because I am the only one who knows where those torpedoes are going to go. That's the one and only time I've ever accidentally team killed anybody in World of Warships by torpedoes launched from, well, anything. And that's one time too many. You can't expect a guy who's within 1.5 kilometres of an enemy destroyer to be watching what's going on behind him, where there are nothing but friendlies. You may argue that, given the way people just spam their torpedoes at absolutely anything and everything, then yeah, you should be paying attention to what's going on behind you. But that doesn't mean it's his fault. Absolutely not. I'm the one who knows where the torpedoes are going. I'm the one who should be checking my firing arcs for anything that could be unintentionally hit by them before I launch them. It was 100% my fault. So why am I showing you this replay? It's not a disaster. I've just team killed a friendly destroyer. Well, two reasons. One, to illustrate the dangers of just firing off your torpedoes without checking your firing arcs and making sure you know that you're not going to hit anything that you don't want to hit. And secondly, because despite that accidental team killing, this was still a pretty spectacular game. We're winning quite easily, although the enemy team have just managed to nail another one of our ships. So the difference is, well, they've lost 5 ships. We've sunk another one. They've lost 6 ships, and I'm coming up on the enemy New York-class battleship. I've got no idea what he's doing all the way at the back there. If he was a Congo, that might make sense. But the New York's guns, they don't have that good a range. So let's see if I can redeem myself and take out the enemy Tier 5 battleship. There he is. The range on these guns is 9.1 kilometers. The range on the torpedoes is 7 kilometers, and the range at which I'll be detected unless I fire the guns is 6.1 kilometers. And I do make a bit of a newbie error here. I fire the guns, and he is paying attention. He immediately pulls into a hard turn and starts bringing the ship around. Now, he probably doesn't know the range of my torpedoes, but he's not taking any chances, and I'm not taking any chances now either. I've dropped my smoke screen. Start turning around. He is inside torpedo range, and there we go. Now, this is not one of those idiot battleship drivers who just sails around in straight lines, especially when he's under torpedo bomber and destroyer attack at the same time. And his secondary batteries start lighting me up as I'm moving too quickly to remain completely hidden inside the smoke screen. I've reloaded one of my torpedo launchers. I fire a second spread, and since his secondaries, he can clearly see me, because his secondaries are lighting me up. So I start shooting with the guns anyway. You can see the secondary batteries opening up, but because he's manoeuvring as hard as he is, which he has to do because of all the torpedoes in the water, he's not able to point his main gun batteries at me. He's taken a hit from the air-launched ones, he takes another one from me. Tubes are loaded again, bring it around the other side. Oh, yeah. The secondary gun batteries on the New York are not bad at all. I'm going to put a wide spread on the third salvo of torpedoes, because the New York is also a very, very manoeuvrable battleship. And it's his secondary batteries. When you start getting as close as this to a battleship, he's highly unlikely to have high explosive loading. And the closer you are to a battleship, the harder it is for them to hit you with his main battery guns anyway. And there's more torpedo hits, but not enough to finish him off. But I've got tubes up and ready on the other side. Keep lighting them up with the guns. And it's his secondary batteries that are doing all this damage to me. Torpedoes away, and I am taking a lot of damage here. Come on, come on, come on. Oh, did you see that ricochet? My torpedoes don't bounce though. Unlike the American Mark 14s. So there you go. New York class battleship gone. Don't know what he was doing loitering around the back of the map like this. He's barely moved from where he spawned, but well, who knows. Anyway, he's dead. I'm not. Although his secondary gun batteries did reduce me to half health. And there's a pair of cruisers. And cruisers, well, killing destroyers is what cruisers are for. Oh, okay, there's one less. But there's another two of them back there. We've got a friendly Furataka-class cruiser down there who's in serious trouble. There he is. Does not have a lot of health remaining. He's being fired upon. Well, he's managed to kill that Kuma. So there's only 2 ships shooting at him now instead of 3, but he's going to die. There's a Yubari and a Furataka shooting at him. They've launched torpedoes, but they're going to finish him off with the guns. Yep, there it is. There's now 4 of us left to their 3, but 2 of our 4 are carriers. We've got one battleship who's miles away from anything. In fact, he's so far away from the fight I can't even see him. Which means those 2 cruisers and the Wyoming-class battleship. I'm not too worried about the Wyoming-class battleship that they have remaining. He's over there as well. But he's too slow and too far away to really decide the outcome of this match. But the Yubari-class cruiser, the Furataka-class cruiser, oh yeah. They can get here in time to kill me, or at least hit me and prevent me from capping. So I am going to scuttle over to the far end of this cap circle. And when they start getting a little closer, I am going to drop a smoke screen. And I am going to hide in the smoke screen and pray that our carriers are paying attention. I may still be able to win this by capping out, but I certainly can't go face to face against 2 cruisers. Not with a half health tier 4 destroyer against a tier 4 and tier 5 cruiser. And they're getting awfully close. Friendly battleship? No, I'm going to get no help from the friendly battleship. On the bright side, they're going to get no help from their battleship. And you can see that the carriers, they are vectoring torpedo bombers and dive bombers over in this direction. So they are paying attention. These guys start firing blind into the cap circle. I haven't been spotted, but I'm coming perilously close to winning by capping. And so they're just firing blind in the hope of hitting me and resetting the cap. My surface detection range is 6.1 kilometers, which means they're just too close. So I have to make a fight of it. I'm not going to win by capping. I put torpedoes in the water, trying to take advantage of the confusion sown by the friendly carriers as they drop their own air-launched torpedoes at this guy, and I'm no longer in the smoke screen. They can now see me. Here it comes, and bang, there, they've reset the cap. So I'm now in exactly the position that I did not want to be in. I'm having to fight at point-blank range against a tier 4 and a tier 5 cruiser. The one good thing that I can say about this, as I drop my final smoke screen and desperately maneuver to try to avoid their guns, is that these guys are coming under air attack as well, which does mean that it's going to limit their ability to get their guns pointing at me, because they're having to maneuver to avoid the dive bombers and avoid the torpedoes dropped by the torpedo bombers. And our 2 carriers did do an exceptionally good job. I'm not detected anymore, by the way, and my torpedoes are up again. So I'm going to launch again, and here come more torpedo bombers. I'm well out of the cap circle now. This was never going to be decided by me sitting in the cap circle. Now, that guy over there has not necessarily seen the torpedoes that I've launched, because I launched them from inside the smoke screen, but he will have seen the torpedo bombers coming in, so he stayed on a straight and level course in order to weave in between the torpedoes launched by the carrier, which meant that it just made him a sitting duck for my torpedoes. So, 1 down, 1 to go. This guy's seen me, however. Now, you'll notice I keep scoring critical hits with my high explosive 120mm guns. I keep knocking this guy's main gun batteries out. And I think he's only got 2 gun turrets that are actually able to fire at me, which I didn't realise at the time, but I realised from watching the replay in greater detail, and that made me very, very happy in my pants, because at the end of the day, he is in a cruiser, and there goes his engine. Oh, that might affect the ability of these torpedoes to hit him. His engine is out, so he's slowing down. but his steering is still intact. Yep, he's managed to avoid all of the torpedoes, but there are more torpedoes coming in from the torpedo bombers. It's just those two gun turrets at the rear that are actually able to fire at me, and they're not hitting. And I keep hitting him because the guns on the Isokaze are surprisingly good. I've still got my anti-aircraft guns turned off at this point. There's absolutely no reason for it. They all know where I am. I keep hitting this guy with the guns. Torpedoes going in from the torpedo bombers. His engine is still out. You can see the flames coming from his funnels. And there's his two remaining gun turrets trying to fire at me. Of course, with his engine knocked out, while he could still initially steer to avoid the first couple of spreads of torpedoes that were fired at him, now he just doesn't have enough speed left to make the rudder bite into the water, and so he's a sitting duck for the aircraft carrier. Finishes him off with another air-launched torpedo strike. And while all that was going on, somebody sank the enemy battleship, so that was a win. 4,263 experience. A couple of missions completed there as well, but still over 2,000 base experience. Tier 4 destroyer in a Tier 5 match. Did around 60,000 damage, majority of that with the torpedoes. At the end of the day, it is still a Japanese destroyer. About 40,000 torpedo damage and sank 4 ships, unfortunately. One of them was on our team, so oops. Our second and final replay in the Isokaze comes courtesy of Superior here, and frankly, what happens in this game is just unbelievable. You need to see it. That's all I'm going to say. It is absolutely spectacular. He's got a couple of things going for him that I didn't have in the previous match. This is an open beta game, so his ship has camouflage, and he's also got the engine boost consumable, although he only has the 2 smoke screens, whereas I had the 3. He's also top tier. This is a Tier 4 game. He's in a Tier 4 destroyer. Although the kind of matchmaking that you get into in a destroyer isn't really as important in a destroyer as any other kind of ship. Pretty much anybody can kill you in a destroyer anyway. They have no health, no armor. They take critical damage every time they get hit. They're constantly getting their engine knocked out. The matchmaking isn't that much of an issue in a destroyer as it is in a cruiser, a battleship, or an aircraft carrier, particularly aircraft carriers. If you're in a Tier 8 match in a Tier 6 carrier, you're next to useless, particularly if there's a Tier 8 carrier, for example, on the enemy team, because you just can't shoot down his aircraft. They have too many hit points. And one of his fighter groups are enough to deal with pretty much anything you can put up in the air. It's a big problem for aircraft carrier drivers, but for destroyer drivers, big deal. Superior has powered straight up the middle of the map and he immediately starts capping B, which is good to see. I wish more destroyer drivers would do this. B is the most important, because it's right in the middle. It's the most important capture point to go for. And in a destroyer, you're the fastest and most stealthiest ship on the team. You're the logical choice to do it, but so often you just see destroyers not doing it. From B, if the enemy are capping A or C, you can get there and do something about it. Not so easy if you're capping A and the enemy team start capping C. You're just too far away. Now, he has been detected by those fighters, which should mean that that cruiser he just launched those torpedoes at, he's just not going to hit. Should. And there's an enemy destroyer who's getting a little bit too close. He's starting to take fire. He's been hit. This is less than good. He's dropped his smoke screen, he's activated his engine boost, and yes, his anti-aircraft guns were lighting up those fighters, and that didn't help. But at that point, the fighters had spotted him anyway, so it absolutely didn't hurt to fire at them. He's been joined in the cap here by another destroyer, but that destroyer looks like he's going to eat a torpedo or two. No, he managed to maneuver. I think he's going to be okay. Superior has lost a bit of health. Oh, well, me and my big mouth. Oh, that's just embarrassing. Oh, well, yeah, you can see the problems that destroyer behind him had. He managed to avoid the first 3 of the 4 torpedoes fired at him, but then he was about to run aground, so frankly, you'd have been better off running aground, because that doesn't immediately kill you. He straightened out to avoid hitting the island, and the final torpedo slammed right into him. Superior's been detected by aircraft again. It's those torpedo bombers. That's not an immediate threat because they've already launched their torpedoes against those friendly ships over there. Unfortunately, well, tactically the situation ain't looking great. They're down 1 ship, they've lost a destroyer. The enemy team have A. They're decapping B. They've just sunk another destroyer. The one good thing that we can say so far about this match is that his team have just managed to cap C. So, you know, there's that. Our team has taken the lead? What are you talking about, man? Don't you just love that? The announcer in World of Warships is on crack. You're down 600 points. The enemy team have 2 of the 3 cap circles. And our team has taken the lead. Yeah. Anyway. Superiors go and chasing carriers. All too often, you see it time and time and time again. When an enemy carrier has launched his fighters, or his bombers, or whatever, and they're out of ammunition, and he's recovering them, they often just press the recover aircraft button, and the aircraft will then make a beeline straight... Oh, they've just lost another ship. Fantastic. And the enemy aircraft will make a beeline straight for the carrier. A smart carrier driver... I've actually seen a replay where a carrier driver used that to his advantage, and he vectored his aircraft. He was the last one left alive, and he forced a draw by vectoring his aircraft right to the far corner of the map. So everybody chased the aircraft right to the far corner of the map, and he was right in the other corner of the map. It was the sneakiest thing I've ever seen, and very, very well done. But hardly anybody ever does it. Hardly anybody ever just sends the aircraft on a deception course and then routes them back to the carrier. So you can usually tell where the enemy carriers are going to be by just seeing which direction their aircraft are going in after they've expended their ammunition. And sure enough, shortly afterwards, there he is. Now, it's just a Langley-class carrier. This is a Tier 4 game after all, so you're not going to get any Bogues or Independences or anything like that. And he is never going to escape. But, well, they have lost 6 ships at this point, and they still haven't done anything about the A or the B point. But at least Superior is going to get himself some nice, fat, tasty, juicy carrier ass for dinner. He's not quite in range yet. He's checking around. There was an enemy destroyer over there. He launched some torpedoes at him, but they didn't hit anything. And he's still around. We haven't managed to sink any of the enemy destroyers yet, so he's out there somewhere in the general location of that smoke screen. You can see he's launching torpedoes. There they go. This guy's now in gun range, and before too long he's also going to be in torpedo range. Has one last look. Yeah, he is. You can see his aircraft coming straight back, but they're not going to be a threat. At the very best they're going to spot him, but they're not going to be able to do anything about it. He's been detected anyway the second he fires his guns. The returning aircraft, of course, aren't going to have any ammunition, so he's got to put this guy on fire and then light him up with his torpedoes. Put him on fire, it puts his flight deck out of commission. You can recover aircraft, but he can't launch them again. There you go, he's burning. Now, if he has any sense, he's going to put the fire out. He can't have used his damage control ability yet. This is the first time he's been hit, but he keeps burning for a bit, and oh, that is not good. That is not good at all. That's an Arkansas Beta and a Wyoming-class battleship. What the hell they're doing over here is anybody's guess. The Arkansas Beta was the battleship reward given to the beta testers from the closed beta test. And look at the damage that guy is doing. It's basically the same ship as the Wyoming, except it has a very, very good high explosive round for its main battery guns. It does a lot of damage, so much that it's actually worth just firing nothing but high explosive from the Arkansas Beta's guns. His torpedoes have struck home, however. Bingo, there you go. He's killed the Langley. He's dropped his smoke screen. He has almost no health. He does not like getting shot at by those battleships. Meanwhile, the rest of his team turn up, and they have actually managed to take B back off the enemy and hold on to C. And they start taking these 2 battleships under fire. St. Louis leading the charge there, but he's obviously going to take the brunt of the battleship's return fire now that Superior is no longer spotted. He's actually turned his anti-aircraft guns off. Now, you might think that's a dumb thing to do because he's just sunk the enemy carrier, but there is actually still an enemy fighter squadron floating around there somewhere. And he doesn't want to risk giving himself away by shooting at them. Now, remember, 7-kilometer range on these torpedoes. At 6.1 kilometers, he gets detected on the surface. Now, that Arkansas Beta is about to pop out of direct line of sight, so he can afford to get closer once that guy's on the other side of the island. Which, of course, makes it more likely that these torpedoes are going to hit. Swings the final tube around, and all 6 torpedoes away. Now, he's got to get out of there before the Arkansas Beta comes around the other side of the island, within 6.1 kilometers, and spots him. and that shouldn't be a problem. The Wyoming is the only ship that has a clear line of sight to him, and he's over 10 kilometers away, so he's not going to get detected. And he's managed to get far enough away from the Arkansas Beta, and there we go, yep, flooding damage, flooding damage, flooding damage, and he's gone. So he's nailed the Arkansas Beta. Now, the Wyoming, or what's that? Oh, South Carolina. It's probably going to be the Wyoming. He is closer. But if he's going to go after that Wyoming, he's going to have to watch out for that fighter squadron. If he gets within 3.1 kilometers of those fighters, they will light him up. And the Wyoming will be able to start firing at him. And that's going to be tricky because his best line of approach on the Wyoming is to go around the right-hand side of that island. And that's obviously going to take him closer to the fighters, so he's going to have to pay careful attention to those aircraft to ensure he doesn't get spotted by them and shot out of the water by the Wyoming. Wyoming's coming on. I mean, the Wyoming can't see him yet, and he is firing at the cruiser behind Superior, and he's just coming into range, but he's going to have to wait for him to clear the island, wait for that firing arc. Yep, torpedoes away. Wyoming's just fired. Now, here's the thing. The Wyoming has to know that there is a destroyer in the area. The Arkansas Beta just got torpedoed to death. So if he continues sailing in a straight line, you know he's going to continue sailing in a straight line. Yeah, there they go. That does look pretty good, doesn't it? And the aircraft haven't detected him. And there's one, there's two, there's the high caliber award. Damn it, torpedoes are so overpowered. Really? Tell him, Jim. So, while Jim Carrey is explaining what should be bloody obvious, you will note a couple of things. First of all, the enemy team have just capped B, so they now hold, as well as all of the points, they've now got 2 of the flags. And Superior's team only have 2 ships left. There's Superior in his Isokaze with 1100 health and that Battleship. And that Battleship is coming under fire from, well, we can see 2 ships that are shooting at him, but that's a smoke screen up there. In fact, all 3 enemy destroyers are closing in to be the one to kill this Battleship. He's taken fire from a Phoenix. There's also an enemy Battleship directly on the other side of that island that we can't quite see just yet. This is where things start getting a bit comical. The Battleship starts turning to port. And so Superior, I don't know if you could call this a very, very risky shot or a superbly well aimed shot, but he puts the torpedoes in the water ahead of the Battleship as he turns to port. They do all miss, but it's very, very close. He's trying to put torpedoes into that Phoenix up there, but the Phoenix isn't having any of it. They're all going to miss. The Phoenix starts turning around in order to launch his own torpedoes at point blank range, because they only have a 4.5 kilometer range, into the Battleship. But watch the destroyers behind the Phoenix. There's 2 of them just gone past. Remember those torpedoes that Superior launched at the Phoenix? There they go. There they go. Watch everybody. Watch those 2 destroyers. Watch them run into each other. And then eat one of the torpedoes. So there's yet another devastating strike for Superior as he switches to widespread and tries to nail this Phoenix. The Battleship is now gone, of course, so he's the only thing left for the 6 remaining enemy ships to shoot at. Got his torpedoes away, he set the Phoenix on fire, and he's narrowly managing to avoid the return fire from this ship. I mean, oh, that's not going to be good. That's not going to be good. You do not want to run the ship aground when you're getting shot at by a Phoenix. That thing, well, it's no St. Louis, but it's got a lot of guns. And he's managed to sink the Phoenix. That Phoenix, however, did manage to knock his engine out. Even after the torpedoes had hit him, the shells were still in the air, knocked his engine out and reduced him to 408 health, and that is going to be critically important. He wastes no time whatsoever in repairing the engine damage. Obviously, he's still lit up, and there's still a pair of Isokaze-class destroyers out there, and a South Carolina-class battleship, and they were all firing at him. Odds on certain that those 2 Isokazes are going to be closing in to try to finish off the job, so he puts a spread of torpedoes down their last known vector, and starts opening up the distance. The only concealment he can use is this island. And then one of the Isokazes pops into detection range at 6.3 kilometers. He must have been firing his guns, but doesn't take long for them to both get within 6.1 kilometers of each other, at which point they both know exactly where each other are, and they both start shooting at each other. They both miss. He loses sight of the Isokaze. He's obviously still being spotted by the other Isokaze. This guy has to come around one side of this island, so he fires 2 of his 3 launchers around each side of the island just to cover his bets, but he keeps his 3rd tube in reserve. Shots out there from the enemy Isokaze telegraphing his position and announcing that he's going to come around the right hand side of the island, and Superior has kept his 3rd launcher in reserve. He swings it around, Isokaze misses, launches the torpedoes, continues the turn with his torpedoes away, gets out a direct line of fire from this enemy Isokaze, who is of course going to come powering straight around the corner and run face first into those 2 torpedoes, because why the hell not? But he doesn't have time to celebrate his 6th kill and his Confederate award to go with his high caliber and multiple devastating strikes, because there's another enemy Isokaze who's just taken his engine out, but his damage control ability is off cooldown. He immediately uses it, turns to avoid the torpedoes, and then disaster strikes. He's on 78 health when he nails his 7th kill in this game, but his engine's been knocked out again, and he's been detected by a South Carolina class battleship 6.5 kilometers away. If he hadn't had his engine knocked out twice in a row, I am 100% confident that every single one of these torpedoes would have hit that South Carolina, and he would have finished this game with 8 kills. He would never have won. The enemy team were about to win on points anyway, but I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, the fact that if he hadn't had his engine knocked out twice, he would have lost that game anyway, but he would have lost it with 8 kills instead of 7. I think that's actually worse, but what a performance. High caliber. To get high caliber in World of Warships, you have to do damage exceeding 30% of the total combined hit points of the entire enemy team. He also got Confederate. Confederate, not like in World of Tanks, where you just have to hit, you don't even have to damage a certain number of enemy tanks. In World of Warships, you don't just have to hit them. Well, you do have to hit them, but you also have to do at least 20% worth of their health in damage to them in order to qualify for Confederate. So, 1 high caliber, 1 Confederate, and 5 devastating strikes. And somehow, even with 7 kills, he took out more than half of the enemy team by himself, and he still managed to lose. In a way, you know, I'm quite glad that he didn't actually send me his post-battle screenshots, because if I had actually seen for sure how much damage he did in that game and how much experience he got for losing, I would probably have been reduced to tears. So there's that. Anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed that. Or learned something from it, or at least been entertained by it. And if you haven't enjoyed it, or learned something from it, or been entertained for it, then it sure sucks to be you, because you've just wasted the best part of 38 minutes watching something that you didn't enjoy. And that's it for me for today. As always, folks, take care, and I'll catch you next time.